Where is he? So it looks like a couple of you guys are watching. If that's the case, let Baja know that the Google Doc is live. And then pretty much I have your review book, so I'm just going to go from the review book from beginning to end. We'll even end with all the questions and go through the multiple choice questions. So if anybody's out there, let Baja know so we can communicate things and I can see the Google Doc. David, it looks like you're on the Google Doc. I don't know if you're watching me, but if you are, you have editing rights now to that document as well, so you can start typing on it. So it looks like a few of you guys are watching me here. There's Baja. All right. All right, looks like we'll get going here. Yeah, so it looks like, guys, so Baha and David have access to that, so contact those guys. Looks like Baha's there, but don't know. But David said, Nami, we want to start the questions. I don't know if I'm going to do like individual questions. I thought we just go through the entire chapter and I'd highlight what's important. So I was going to use guys your review book and just kind of go through the thing. So, and then what I was going to do is I was going to pause, and if questions start popping up as we move through the actual entire review book, instead of going all over the place, then I'll answer those questions. So let me know, David. It looks like you, or I don't know where anybody else is, but or Baha. Let me know if that's okay. And if that's okay, and you have those 19 viewers, it looks like they're able to communicate to you what the questions are, we'll be good to go. But we need somebody to be able to communicate to the 20 viewers or whoever is out there what the questions are as we move through the review book. I'm glad you're alive. 7:03, 8 o'clock. I'm out of this party. So, all right. So I'll try my best to go ahead and kind of look at the document every once in a while. So you guys have to like stop as soon as you can, as you want. But I'm gonna hopefully you have your review book. So I'll give you a couple moments for you guys to grab your review book. I have the 2018 edition. I mean, I think you guys all have the 2015 edition. So we theoretically should have the same page numbers. I kind of went through them. I haven't never checked this far in advance, so I'm pretty sure we have the same page numbers and everything else. So I'm on 521. And so I don't know. I always love reading the chapter introductions just as a teacher, just to make sure I understand what's going on. So I'm going to go ahead and read that out. Okay, cool. I'm glad you guys have 2018. So 521, I'm going to read that out and kind of talk about a couple items, and then we'll move forward. So President Roosevelt's fervent desire for peace was hardly new. World War I, after all, was meant to be a war to end all wars. And as Woodrow Wilson had said, a war to make the world safe for democracy. In 1933, however, few people believed that the fragile peace established by the Treaty of Versailles would hold up for much longer. In Asia, Japan was threatening China. In Europe, the Nazi Party under Adolf Hitler had come to power in Germany with promises of reasserting German nationalism and militarism. In the United States, worries about the Depression overshadowed concerns about a Second World War. So, once again, I kind of previewed everything. I want to pause there. The emphasis of the Great Depression and really that's really the focus of America's isolationism and why we're turning inwards. So, obviously that's a major issue there. And even if war did break out, most Americans were determined not to send troops abroad again. However, a Second World War did occur, and the United States played a major role in fighting it. How and why the U.S. foreign policy changed from a disengagement to neutrality and from neutrality to total involvement is the subject of this chapter. Moreover, the war transformed American economy and society in many ways more dramatically than the New Deal. And I think we've kind of emphasized that point, and that's kind of the focus of what the key concepts are saying. Hey, how do we go from isolationists to neutral helping Britain to, all right, we're fully committed. And there's multiple times that FDR is like, I just read something like in 1937, he says, hey, all the democracies unite and kill all the fascists. Basically, we should fight a war against all the fascists and eliminate them. And basically, the American response is so negative. He's like, well, I guess I won't be talking about killing fascism or creating wars anymore. So again, just kind of note that, I think that what is the test going to be about? If we were to look at this thesis, the test is going to be about how do we go from isolationism to neutrality to supporting Britain with neutrality to all-out war what is the effect here at home, the home front, like on women, African Americans, Mexican Americans, Japanese Americans? And then lastly, what was the result of the war? How did those peace treaties that were made at the very end of the war kind of set up for the Cold War? And a little bit more about the fighting. We kind of talked about how the word atomic bombs and how there's actually some battles, D-Day and island hopping, not a specific battle, but like for the first time, we're seeing military tactics actually being tested on this test. So that's kind of an interesting moment. So, when we look at the key concepts, there's like a total of 5 of them, let's say. 3 of them are how we go from isolation to neutrality to war. Another one is how do we fight the war here and at home? And the other one is what was the results of the war? So if you kind of focus all your questions around those 5 themes, I think we're going to be pretty good. 25 viewers. Sweet. Better than any Brave school. All right. Let me know if that's okay. If you guys have any questions about that, because now we'll start moving on into World War II. So I'll pause and let you guys do what you got to do. David or Baha, somebody acknowledge something. All right. So, who cares about Herbert Hoover's foreign policy? I think we've already talked about Japanese aggression in Manchuria. Ultimately, kind of one thing that if you look on 522 that you might want to add is that the League of Nations actually tells Japan, you can't do that. You can't just invade Manchuria. That's against what we believe in. And basically, Japan just walks out of the meeting. And I think that's just kind of what I take from that is a signal that to Nazi Germany and anybody else ready to fight a war, that the League of Nations doesn't mean anything. It's like lame. It's not going to help anything. So that's kind of a little moment on 522. Stimson doctrine. I'm just doing a little preview here, but it looks like it talks about the open door policy. So obviously when Japan invades China, basically they're shutting down trade to all the other countries and basically controlling China for themselves. So you again can see like China is saying, well, why can't we be like Europe? And, they actually create something called the East Coast Prosperity Sphere. And what was that? Is basically this big dome around Asia, and around all the islands, from the Philippines to Vietnam and Thailand to most of the coast of China. And basically, this huge sphere, they were going to help. You can hear the Japanese being like so European, so social Darwinist, so racist at certain levels. They said our job is to help all of these countries, like the Philippines, the Vietnamese, the Thai, the Indonesians, the Guamanians, the Samoans, all the islands, all the oceanic countries, even like to an extent like Australia. We're all gonna work together and create trade, and we're gonna show them how to create trade. And I'm sure that sounds very familiar if you understand anything about imperialism. All right, so that's something about the Stimson doctrine. Somebody just said 9 power treaty. Where is the 9 power treaty? Is that on 522? Or are you just taking questions? Do you guys want me to just start just taking questions? Or do you want me like going through all this stuff? Oh, okay, sorry. So what Japan does is when it goes into Manchuria, it's gonna it puts in another one we call puppet government. And what a puppet government is obviously it's some Chinese officials, but largely they're being controlled by Japan. And so the 9 power treaty says this: any puppet government that's put into force, or you can't invade a country in force, we think that's illegal. And so that's what he's saying there. He says, hey, we're not going to recognize that your government in China, this puppet government called Manchukuo, we're not getting recognized in the government. We won't trade with it. We won't talk to them about that. That's not a legitimate government. That was just put up by the Japanese when you invaded Manchuria. All right, no problem, Baha. but I think I kind of explained the 9-power treaty. The good neighbor policy, I kind of explained it kind of pretty well today. If you're in 5th period, I'll do a review because maybe 5th period you didn't get it nearly as well. I thought I did pretty good in all 3 classes. But you have to understand the good neighbor policy is doing 2 things to Latin America just to make sure that we get taken care of. The United States is going to be supported by Latin America in case a war breaks out. So obviously in Europe there's a war. We've seen in World War I that the Germans almost interfered with Latin America by sending Mexico the telegram to go ahead and invade the United States, and we didn't want any of that stuff happening ever again. So there are 2 things that President Franklin Delano Roosevelt does that says, hey, this is how we're going to be a good neighbor, and in case there is a war and in case we need anything, remember, we're good neighbors and let's help each other out. Let's be on the same side, basically. So number 1 is he reverses the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. The Roosevelt Corollary was created by his cousin, Teddy Roosevelt. If you remember him, he's the one that did Panama Canal. He's the one that did the Philippines. He definitely was part of some major imperialist issues. And he says this: we can invade in Latin America at any time. And that was an extension of what we call the Monroe Doctrine, was Roosevelt Corollary. He takes that out. He says, no, we're not going to be the government that's going to invade you. So you can promise that we won't invade you. Therefore, hopefully we're a little bit better neighbors. Second thing, which is kind of interesting, he enters what's called a dollar diplomacy, in which America was buying land in Central America and other places and putting American businesses there. Well, the American businesses would profit, therefore, off of that country's labor, like the workers that are there, and they would also profit off the land or the resources, wherever they needed, and they take all that wealth and bring it back, obviously, to America, what we call colonialism. And he reverses that. So it's basically trying to treat Latin America with a little bit more respect, a little bit more dignity. Okay? I don't know. That's a great question. How much did Latin America involve themselves in the war? I don't know. It's definitely never going to be on the test, so we'll just ignore that 3rd question on that one. I don't know. There's not really much on 524 that I would think would be on the test. I mean, this is all really happening in Europe. So just kind of moving on, and we're going to go and skip that. We'll go to 525. I mean, 525 is really, I think, where the test is going to start going. Obviously, it's this kind of neutrality thing. Cool. Yeah, I mean, resources. And we also, I mean, Mexican labor came over and supported shipbuilding here in San Diego for the Navy. So, I mean, you can argue it certain ways for sure. Latin America supported us, but did they send a Navy out, and who did they fight? I really don't know. So American isolationists, first of all, I look at, I mean, you don't need to read the lessons of World War I, but if you're watching and you have your review book, definitely look at the Neutrality Acts. I mean, what is the lesson of World War I? Let's not get into war because these are European problems. But the Neutrality Acts, and here's where isolation senators and representatives, remember that we're not just a president that rules things, Congress rules things, and Congress represents usually the will of the people, and the people here do not want another war. So let's look at the 3. Neutrality Act of 1935 authorized the president to prohibit all arms shipments and forbid U.S. citizens to travel to ships of belligerent nations that were fighting the war. So you couldn't go to Germany. You couldn't even go to Great Britain because they were fighting the war at this time. The one in 1936 stopped loans and credit, so stopped the banking industry from making money off of people fighting the war. And then lastly, to the Spanish one. Go in Spain, because then Spain is one of the beginning starts of the Civil War, and Spain is like considered one of the first battles of World War II. So you can see in those 3, those are total neutrality acts. Now, some of you guys are going, but wait, what about cash and carry? What about lend-lease? Like, aren't those completely against what those are? Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Franklin Delano Roosevelt started promoting other ideas like cash carry and lend-lease, which moved our country from an isolationist to a neutral nation that's kind of only supporting one country, Great Britain. And so, I mean, that's what he did. The cash and carry dismantled, obviously, the arms shipments and said, well, at least it's not loans and credits. At least we're doing cash. And then the lend-lease basically got rid of all the neutrality acts completely. to support Britain in its war against the Nazis. Spanish Civil War, not important. European. America First Committee. Yeah, I mean, it's what? Let's just be America first and let's not worry about Europe. Cool. 526 is the prelude to war. There's appeasement. Appeasement is largely a European thing because largely Great Britain and this guy called Chamberlain at this time are talking. So I don't really even have to worry about it. But what's happening at this time is Hitler is just taking more and more land illegally. And ultimately, when he invades Poland, that's the last straw, and that's when war is declared. But remember, we don't get into war until the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor. That quarantine speech on 526, if you were here at the beginning of the live stream, I was talking about how Roosevelt really tries to multiple times get the people ready for war. And here was one where he like delivers a speech, and the speech is that their job is to quarantine the aggressor. And what quarantine means is to stop and even usually destroy. I mean, if you quarantine something, you kind of isolate it, I suppose. But ultimately, your job is to destroy a disease. It's usually used in disease. Well, he does his quarantine speech saying that we need to control fascism, control Nazi Germany, control Japan and their aggression, and kind of quarantine them. And they, the overwhelming response to his speech by the American public, by the American people, is negative. Like, what are you talking about? We're not going to do that. We got our own problems. And so, I mean, here's a moment in 1937, as early as, again, 1937, he thinks we need to go to war, but he keeps on asking, and he keeps on getting the response from Congress and from the American people that they ain't ready and they don't want to deal with it. So neutrality war in 527. I don't know. I'd move on. There's cash and carry. I really think we did really well on all three of those. Going to 529, a couple of you guys asked me about the Four Freedoms Act. And this goes under his arsenal democracy. So again, Roosevelt now is moving from, we are moving from just a neutral nation to a pro-democracy one, even though we're not fighting the war. I mean, you can add that as like a kind of a thought as like another stage. We went from like isolationist to neutral to now pro-democratic, with again Great Britain be the beneficiary of all of our money and all of our guns and bombs. So the Four Freedoms speech, you know, he says that we are going to give a lot of money to Britain to get us, because it is our job to help other nations defend their four freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from want. And David asked, what does freedom from want, man? I don't know. I think freedom from want of things. Like, everybody should have enough things in their life to be materialistically happy and have like a good life. And then freedom from fear. So, you know, I mean, one thing about FDR and one thing about World War II is like, you know, and hopefully some of you guys are like, this sounds like a president we heard, Mr. Korematsu, and he's actually quoted at the beginning of the chapter, making the world safe for democracy, right? This Woodrow Wilson idealism. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt is now, with World War II, has really captured the spirit of Wilsonian idealism and has really said that it is the purpose of America to defend and support democracies. And you can see that happening in World War II, and that'll be so important because that's what our main thrust is today and all of the Cold War. So I kind of, you know, Four Freedom speech is not that important, but what it represents is America emerging from World War II as the defender of democracy and pushing democracy in all corners of the globe and taking out people like North Korea today, who's a fascist dictator, and like being really questioning of people like Russia and Putin, who kind of look like they're getting ready to go, you know, become outright dictators right now. I mean, you begin to see this consistent theme that United States theoretically is this supporter and not like harbinger, or this like activator of democracy. It's our job to bring democracy out. Peacetime draft is easy. It's a draft during the peacetime. It's a few years before the war. So they want that to happen. So, yeah, you guys are doing good. Don't freak out, Baja. You guys are doing fine. All right. So anyways, arsenal democracy, what's the idea is that, you know, I mean, here's one of these fireside chats. And if you don't know what a fireside chat is, he's saying they have radio at this time. They don't have live television. They do have movies. So every about 2 to 3 weeks, you're getting updates as film crosses the ocean and comes to movie theaters, or not 2 to 3 weeks, probably within a week or so. You also have telegraph cables for newspapers, but Still, most people are being entertained, and most people are getting their information not on the internet but through the radio. And every week, Roosevelt has these things called fireside chats, and he's sitting there and he's talking to the American people. And this really started actually during the Great Depression, that he thought it was his role to kind of be the father figure of the country and kind of like talk to his children called the American people and try to show them how the government's taking care of them. So he has these fireside chats. And in one of those fireside chats, he said this, we must become the great arsenal of democracy. We must support democracy. We must arm democracy to strike down things like fascism and communism later. So, hopefully understand how we are moving to that, what I call moving from a neutral phase to a very pro-democracy, arsenal of democracy phase. Using warfare to promote our democratic values. Lend-Lease Act, I think we're good. Atlantic Charter, we talked about really well. Talking about as a prelude. In fifth period, I just want to make sure that you understand that self-determination for all people, like the fact that democracy be okay, no territorial expansion, that, what Nazi Germany and Japan want to do, wasn't allowed anymore, and later the Soviet Union's going to want to expand its power, and free trade, which is a very capitalist idea, but if you're a communist, it's a way in which the rich exploit the poor in other countries. So, yeah, that's a good question. So I guess we'll kind of skip, and actually that gets us to our part 531. So, question 6, one of you guys said, could you talk about what happened domestically as far as militarization during wartime? I mean, 531, the home front, and then the next thing says mobilization. I mean, this is all the answers, guys. I mean, I really don't know. It's all there for you. So, it's very clear. But I'll go through it real quickly. So, read the introduction. The success of if you don't know what mobilization is, the success of U.S. and allied armed forces depend on mobilizing America's people. Its people need to do things or fight. Industries, the factories, and the businessmen, and creative and scientific communities. Even our most important thinkers, our philosophers, even our scientists, our universities are all going to have to rally behind the war. And the role of the federal government expanded well beyond anything in World War I or the New Deal. I said a couple of times, if you look at Franklin Roosevelt, and we're going to go through this right now, he is doing a lot of things that you're like, whoa, wow. How can you do that without any vote from the people, any approval of Congress? So federal government, they have the War Production Board, and it's managing war industries. They have the Office of War Mobilization, who's controlling raw materials and what gets produced and how much and who gets it. It talks about that they kind of set wages. If you turn to the next page, they talk about contractors and the amount of wages. They have the Office of Price Administration, which is freezing prices so that we don't have inflation and dramatic ups and downs in our economy, because we can't have an economy going up and down during the war. Make sure the wages are the same. Make sure your rents are going up. They're telling you can only eat so much meat, only so much sugar, how much is gasoline, how many auto tires you can have. I mean, all of this stuff is, again, to ensure that, first of all, prices don't go up, because if that happens, then the people are going to be in a problem at home and you're fighting a war. You got a double whammy. Then it says deficit spending. Keynes would say this is awesome. You guys spend yourself out of this thing. And so that's what happens. Business and industry, if you want to look at it, talks about California, that we're making ships in 14 days in California. So all of these, like, instead of cars are going out, we have fighter planes, tanks, we got ships being made. San Diego becomes a massive one. Research and development, we got our Manhattan Project. We got people starting to work on the atomic bomb. Labor unions and corporations all agree not to ever have a strike so that they can continue making stuff for the war. A lot of money for the war. Everybody thinks Adolf Hitler's not such a nice guy through propaganda. I mean, you have your African Americans are coming in. The Mexican Americans have the Bracero program on 533. You guys know about the Rosie the Riveter. Somebody asked me about American Indians. We had, I think it was Chris, and he talked about American Indians. I said, yeah, we have the Navajo code talkers. You have 25,000 of them are in the military on page 534. We know we talked about the Japanese Americans, what's happened to my grandfather. Women, Rosie the Riveter, look up what the rivet is. Bam, there it is, mobilization. All right. All right, Mr. What's authoritarianism? Because I heard seriously that communist nations have. Yeah, authoritarianism is just the idea that one single person is making a decision. It's very similar to totalitarianism. Like all of these words, dictatorship, they all begin sounding the same. You know, a fascist dictator is just pretty much a dictator that is really military bent and usually is a general as well. Never hear of fascism. I hear, I think, a lot of military. And some of you guys are like, but isn't our president the commander in chief? Well, yeah, I guess it works out like that. But I just always think like military with fascism. So, guys, on D-Day, I don't think you need to know. I don't know what you want to know. Like how many people died, like how many mines were on the beach, the names of the different beaches, why we didn't go to Omaha and we went to. I really don't think that's going to be on the test, guys. All you need to understand is D-Day is a land invasion. It's a land invasion to help get into the French. It's done by the British and the Americans. The Americans suffered horrible losses, maybe in Normandy, if you really want to know. But what I get from it is it's a land invasion, and Russia's pissed that they're on the other side. Yeah, we talked about FDR. He is seen a dictator, but when there's in war, you pledge allegiance to the United States and you be a good soldier. I mean, he justified all these things, and he had the support of Congress in a lot of these things because of war. You know, one thing you guys may not understand as young kids, but in the past, and I'm kind of been victim of this, is that war kind of unifies people, and it kind of gives people a lot of power. So, anyways. Yeah, war bonds were definitely a thing in World War II. So remember that there's stocks and bonds. My parents always invested in bonds. And what are bonds? The same as stocks, but you're investing in the government. So, for instance, those solar panels that just went up in our school, that was part of a bond measure. Our district didn't have that money. And what they said is they said, taxpayers, would you willingly go ahead and put some of our money out for sale, put some bonds up for sale, and then if people buy our bonds, then we'll get money and we'll have to pay them back plus interest. And so, yeah, bonds were definitely a big thing. That's they're on World War One, and I'm probably pretty similar in World War II. They were called Liberty bonds, which were a way in which you could buy a bond and basically give your money to the government right then and there, and not collect it until 10 years after. You know, most bonds that I see within the bank, they usually had a 10-year maturity date. That means you'd have to wait 10 years after fact. So right now you give them $100 and you wait 10 years and you'll get $150. Is the idea of a bond. It's a little bit more of a conservative idea than the stock. Stock, you can make a lot of money very fast. By the way, the stock market for Facebook over the last 3 days has lost $50 billion in stock credit. So just kind of think about that for a second. Yeah, the only court case that is important that's actually might be quoted inside of your guys' book is Korematsu versus U.S. And that's where a Japanese guy who is a citizen says, well, you can't just take me out of my home, throw me in jail because I'm Japanese. That's against the Constitution. There's a thing called like they call the 14th Amendment, right? I think it is, but there's a race clause or something like that. So he's like basically this racist, blah, blah. And actually the Supreme Court rules in favor of the United States and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. You you guys talked about a dictator. I mean, if you're Japanese American, if you're my grandfather, all he did with a little signature called Executive Order 9066 is took Japanese Americans out of their homes who were citizens and put them in the jail, and they lost everything. So in Korematsu versus the United States, it stated that it is okay for the federal government to do what it wants basically in wartime. And there was actually one of your guys' substitutes that talked about this case. He's like a crazy historian. And it's the fact that this case has never been rescinded. And so still today, you can be thrown into jail if you are seen as a danger to the United States. And that's what that was thought. They apologized for it, and my grandfather did get $20,000 for it, but as far as the court case, it never did get rescinded. So it's still what we call precedent. If somebody were if I say a student who might be, let's say somebody might accuse the government for putting them in because they're Muslim, right now, if they would go back to court cases, the Supreme Court would say, well, according to Korematsu versus the United States, it's okay for the government to do that at certain levels. And they actually have something called the Patriot Act that kind of supports that as well. Did Truman do anything important during the war like FDR? Yeah, well, he's the one that dropped the 2 bombs. So, yeah, it's kind of important. Let's see. Hold on. Before we go a little bit further, guys, let me kind of make sure that we're good. On 535, we go to battlefronts. Going back to the review book, and remember it's the idea of like, air and land attacks are happening. Japan, you guys know island hopping. Okay. And then we're at the end, and I think I did a good job at the end for all our classes, so I can just start answering questions. But David the other day said that another time was talking, I think, to Michaela, saying that really helped him going through the questions. So I'm thinking we should go through these questions on 542. But I'll go look at these couple of questions, and then still got half an hour, so I'm sure we can answer everything. All right, 13. Did Stalin and Hitler only make a pact because they were going to share Poland? I don't know why they. I mean, there's probably, if you were to take a class in European history, 5 billion reasons why Stalin and Hitler made a pact. First of all, although Russia may not be advanced, they have a lot of people and it's a lot of land. And if you know anything about history and Napoleon, it's always a pain to conquer. So in my opinion, Hitler made the pact just to protect his own butt and focus on France. He probably knew that the British Navy was probably the most important thing at that time. And so he thought, go through Belgium, hit the Netherlands, hit France, take out Great Britain. You got General Franco in Spain. You got Mussolini in the south. Secure everything here, and then maybe deal with the communists. Probably even deal with the United States of America before even dealing with the communists. Just let the communists just kick it there until basically everybody gangs up on them. So I can understand why Hitler made the pact. Why did Stalin make the pact? I don't know. He's got his own issues at home. He's like putting that millions of people in prison and trying to get through his little communist revolution and secure his own power. Like the last thing he needs to do is fight another war with these Germans who are pretty aggressive. So I don't know, on both sides, I think there's reasons in addition to sharing Poland. But I mean, again, Hitler breaks the pact, so kind of irrelevant in more European history. The Executive Order 9066 was basically, it's actually, you guys, it's on my podium. You guys have seen it for 3 years. It's the notice that says anybody of Japanese ancestry needs to pack up their crap and get to the closest basically assembly yard, and the assembly yard would basically dictate to you what prison you're on. It basically authorized the internment of Japanese Americans, putting them into what they call internment camps, what you could call concentration camps. What's the difference? I guess historically concentration camps came with death, whereas theoretically internment camps didn't. I don't know if you guys want to go ahead and Google Manzanar and hit images, and you will see, because I drive up that past Mammoth, it's a place that gets like negative 10 degrees in the wintertime and over 120 degrees in the summertime, and people did die of some situations out there. And also, there were riots. If you really research, there's riots. There's an internment camp in Arizona. There's multiple riots in there in which the multiple Japanese are killed by the prison guards because they're rioting just to break out of the dang place because they totally think it's illegal. So the story, however, is like the way it's kind of told, at least by the Japanese history, is that the people all kind of support one another, and Japanese did their best. They created high schools within there. They created Zen gardens. They actually, it's one of the most kind of funny things is they actually put a flagpole and they actually did the Pledge of Allegiance every single day. I got kids that don't even do the Pledge of Allegiance in my class and they sit down, but the Japanese, while they were in jail, still pledged allegiance to the country that was jailing them. Pretty honorable tradition we have as Japanese. So, all right. Anyways, that's Executive Order 9066 and Japanese internment camps. Biggest market out there in regards to supplies. We're worried about how was the economy in China like that. Oh yeah, China is screwed up right now. China has been carved apart by Europe, and now it's just got its butt kicked by Japan. So, China multiple times is gone to crap. So China's like little rise to power. China's had kind of two significant parts. I think, I don't know Chinese history perfectly, but I think around the year 1000, it's pretty strong, but then they start doing inward things, kind of like called protective terrorists and only thinking about themselves. And that's when the Middle East kind of blows up. And after the Middle East blows up, then Europe blows up. And then eventually America kind of gets a little bit strong. China really has not seen growth until the last about 30 years since I was basically born. That's when China started getting its act together. Before then, China was always considered as almost a third world country. So really, China's rise to power has been quite quick, kind of like America's. So it's a little bit concerning. What do we need to understand about the war's impact on society? I would say number one, I want to make sure I know why it got us out of the Great Depression, and then I would probably talk about how it affected obviously minority groups and women. I mean that whenever we talk about society, it's never about the white male because their stories are already being told, but it's always about the female and also minorities. So I mean, I pointed out to you guys, whoever asked number 16. I pointed out to you guys that whole section on mobilization. So this has come up a few times. But if you guys look on page 531, World War II, the home front, and it says mobilization, to the war's impact on society, 533, all the way down. Again, I guess maybe that person was saying, well, like of everything, of African Americans, Mexican Americans, American Indians, Japanese Americans, women, and wartime solidarity, what do we need to know? On May 11th, any of that could pop up, guys. It's definitely part of the key concept for sure. It definitely talks about mobilization efforts and how different groups mobilize to support the war effort, and how some people's civil liberties were taken away, such as the Mexican Bracero program and the Japanese internments. So I think, you look at those, you'll be good to go. 533 to 534 will answer that question. It's okay, Baja. Don't freak out. Oh, yeah. I just want to have. I'm trying to connect things to you guys. So if you guys know those areas, if you ever driven through Allied Gardens or Claremont Mesa, well, just funny. It's just funny the name Allied Gardens, right? It was a garden made for the Allies before they went off to war. So like groups of San Diego really blows up during this time because of the naval base Coronado, and because of our port. We began needing to, and also a large part of our economy today is the military. Up to the north of us is Camp Pendleton, which is a massive Marine base, the biggest Marine base in the United States, and where everybody goes. And then to the south of us, we have Coronado, which is a massive naval shipyard. We have the Miramar Air Force Base right here. I mean, you got our military is huge in the development. So if you guys go to Claremont, Mesa, you'll notice like all the same houses, what we call suburbia. This is something that you should be taking notes on, but God knows there's so much you have to learn on the test that I kind of disregarded it. But that was just created, these really quick, like cookie cutter homes that look exactly the same, like an apartment home type of thing that looks exactly the same, was created very quickly for the soldiers that were coming here in San Diego. And if you guys go to Allied Gardens, which was homes made for British and Americans and probably some French during World War II, as they came over to help us fight the Japanese on the Pacific when we won the war over there. And if you look at Claremont Mesa, these were all basically either homes created for soldiers, or actually homes created for the workers who were in the naval shipyards that were creating the Navy and the airplanes that would go on the battlecraft here in San Diego. So this place was a huge, huge boom because of World War II. Another example of how it got us out of the Great Depression. It just created homes, and if you need homes, you need contractors, and who's buying those homes, who's making those homes? The federal government, and eventually we'll get paid back later. So. On D-Day, the Allies were in France. Why didn't they just get France back from the Nazis? I don't know. That's a hard question. I don't know what that question's saying. Yes, they landed on France. Yes, they died. A lot of people died. Watch the first 15 minutes of Saving Private Ryan. Why didn't they just get France back from the Nazis? I don't know. The Nazis were really good at killing things and fighting people. Sorry, guys. It's kind of a hard question on that one. All right. I think we only got 19 minutes, and it looks like we're done with questions anyway. So yeah, I want to go with a multiple choice too. Sounds good. All right. So hopefully I have the same ones. Here, I'll show you a picture of mine, I think. So is that your guys' touch with the biblical cartoon? Pretty sure we do. Yeah, Baja? Let me know. Baja, if you could type yes. Okay, cool. Awesome. All right, so look at the cartoon. So the first thing we do at the cartoons, look at everything, right? So look at the very top. That's Uncle Sam saying, stay out for my sake as well as your own." And who is he speaking to? A lady that says democracy. And then what does it say underneath here? That they are standing there. Across the Atlantic is Europe. That says war mad Europe, and it has explosions. And they're saying where it says America, the last refuge of democracy. So obviously, this is kind of talking about the isolationist stance. All right, so here you go. Which of the following attitudes most directly contributed to the perspective of this cartoon? So the priority, let's see, A, the priority of President Roosevelt to protect Latin American nations. Well, there's nothing that to do with Latin America. And when we think isolationist, we think World War II, and we think about Europe. Cool. B, the strong opposition to helping the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin. No reference to the Soviet Union. C, the isolation sentiment that developed after World War I. Probably. D, the anti-war policies of Franklin Roosevelt administration. Don't really see the idea of anti-war. Really saying that, hey, the only place for democracy to be here. Correct answer would be C. Okay. Number two, which of the following events most directly conflicted? No, conflicted, if you don't know what that means, is to go against. So with the perspective. So which one of the events went against this perspective cartoon? A, congressional hearings into the causes of U.S. entry into World War I. B, this conflicted with the perspective of this cartoon. Interesting. To try to see what are some things in which perhaps democracy was okay to be in war Europe. The Spanish, so A, maybe, I don't know. The Spanish Civil War between the fascist and Republican forces. Don't really see much about that. Passage of laws prohibiting arms sales, bank loans, and travel to nations of war. Yeah, I mean, that kind of like supports the idea. And then D, Roosevelt's call for democracies to quarantine aggressive nations. Because it says conflicted, I would say probably, I don't know. Hard one, huh? You guys, you guys have different answers? Yeah, see, I checked a couple of them and the questions were the same, but I mean, I didn't look at every single page, obviously. So I have the 2018. Yeah. Yeah, we were just trying to get these books to get you guys something because they had only this other crappy book. Um, well, that stinks. Well, I'm sorry about that. I don't know how useful it is if we go to different questions. Then, I mean, obviously, it's not going to be helpful for most of the people. So, hopefully, I don't know. We got only 15 minutes left, anyways. But hopefully, I answered all your guys' questions. Another thing you could look at, perhaps, is on page 541. There's on my page 541. There's a list of key terms. So maybe you can just look at those key terms, and I mean, those all fit under those themes and what's going on. And I can let you know if it's not that big of a deal or if it is a big deal or give you answers to it. So that's something else we can do. Did the Japanese attacking Manchuria affect anything? Um, Sorry, I looked at number 22. So, I mean, obviously, when the Japanese attack Manchuria, that's their sign of aggression, and they start doing horrible things, which we start learning about, and we begin labeling them, even though we haven't started the war, an enemy. So, yeah, I mean, Manchuria is important. The double V is important. What they mean by double V is a double victory. So, V as a victory that they wanted to win. They wanted to win at out in the war, obviously, and help the United States win against Hitler, but also that they wanted to get victory here at home by gaining equal rights and winning the civil rights thing. African Americans, the role they played during the war, I mean, page 533. So I'll just read through this thing. Attracted by jobs in the North and West, over 1.5 million Americans left the South. So once again, we have this great migration. I think I was talking to Sixth Period about how I was listening on the news. The mayor of New Orleans actually has just brought down all these Confederate statues. If you remember at the beginning of the year, there was all these Confederate statues that were going down, and they brought them down. And he talked about how some of the best jazz players moved from New Orleans because they felt how racist it was, and how crazy it is that how many doctors, lawyers, teachers, scientists, musicians went over to other parts of maybe New York or Miami or other places of the world, or sorry, the United States, and how that may have cost the South, and different things. So it's just kind of interesting. So we still have this great migration. I think somebody asked me, when does the great migration end? I'm like, I don't know. I don't think it's ever ended. You go in the South, there is this still belief of Southern pride and white superiority. And that same mayor, just as a heads up, actually got death threats for removing those Confederate statues. So in addition, 1 million young men left home to serve the armed forces. So another way in which Africans went, not only did they migrate, but they also served in the war. Where their soldiers and civilians all faced continued discrimination and segregation, white resentment in urban areas led to dozens dying in race riots in New York and Detroit during the summer of 1943. Civil rights leaders encouraged African Americans to adopt the double V, one victory over fascism abroad and one to get equality here at home. Membership in the NAACP, which is like the National Association for, I don't know what it is, but I think it's colored people, increased during the war. Another civil rights organization, the Congress Racial Equality, was formed in 1942 to work more militantly for African American interests. After black leaders threatened a protest on Washington, the Roosevelt administration issued an executive order to prohibit discrimination in government and businesses that received federal contracts. So that's an important moment. I mean, if I had to write down anything or learn anything, the Roosevelt actually creates something that ends discrimination. Remember, Woodrow Wilson actually allowed segregation to continue. So he did it. One judicial victory was achieved in the Supreme Court case of Smith versus Allwright, which ruled as unconstitutional denying membership of political parties to African Americans as a way of excluding them from voting in the primaries. All right, I told you the primaries are what helps choose who's going to be our president. And so they said, oh, you can vote for our president, but you can't vote for the primaries, which would elect either Democratic or Republican president. So there it is. It's under African Americans. Okie dokie. I don't see any more questions. So with that being said, I think I'll call it. I'd take a look at those questions at the end and take a look at all the, I don't know, short answers. Just talk it out. On mine, I have this: briefly explain the reference to the ghost of Woodrow Wilson, to really talking about that Wilsonian idealism, how important that was for Franklin Delano Roosevelt. We never talked about the effects, but hopefully you guys understand about the partition. If you're in fifth period, if you go to my website under period 7 at the very, very bottom, I put like what Germany looked like, and you can see like the 3 countries, occupation zones, or the 3 democracies, which is France, Great Britain, the United States, and then you can see the Soviet Union. And you can see Berlin stuck in the Soviet Union, which got divided as well because it was the capital city. And eventually, that's why you have to have an airlift. We have to actually drop supplies via air, because if we go on the land, we're going to get through Soviets. So, yeah, obviously, the effects of the war are super important. And really, there's only one page of the effects, which is the Yalta Conference. But it's really important to understand how that started the Cold War. whoever asked 21, we already went through that, so I'm not going to repeat myself, unfortunately. But I will give you a page number because I'm cool like that. 531, 532. It's all how the government controlled the economy. Would the escort convoys be? Well, I have no page number on escort convoys. When I hear escort convoys, I'm thinking it's the Lend-Lease Act in which we're escorting the British ships by protecting them from German U-boats. Would that be against our neutrality? Franklin Delano Roosevelt would say we're being neutral. I'd say you're protecting British ships using American ships and soldiers, which doesn't seem so neutral. Neutral at all. So yeah, I mean the Alta conference, we went through it through all classes, so I don't know what else to say other than on page 538. Really, there's, in my opinion, three things that I would remember. I know Germany would be divided into occupation zones. There would be free elections in the liberated countries of Eastern Europe. So I don't know. At this point, you might want to go to my website. So I'm going to go to my website right now. I'm going to open another tab and I'm going to go to my website. I'm getting off the Google Doc. If you're with me, I would do that too. So if you're on my website, go to period 7 and go to the very, very bottom, and I'll kind of explain some things. You got kind of like 3 different maps. I put World War maps. Okay, first look at the European map. So that big Germany one right in the middle, if you're there, that one is going to be divided into 4 zones. We'll take a look at that in a second. But more importantly, on this first map, that is the one not of the Pacific Ocean, but one of Europe. If you look at it, he says this, they agree to have free elections in Eastern Europe. And so if you put your finger on your computer and you put Poland, you look at Romania, you look at Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, all of those areas, theoretically, we're supposed to have free elections. And what actually happens is right after World War II, the communists go over there and they allow elections, but only the communists are allowed to win. And so they all turn into communist states. So just as a heads up, these are the states that are going to form what we call the Iron Curtain. When Winston Churchill brings that speech, the Iron Curtain has descended across Europe. He's saying that those countries have suddenly overnight turned into communists because of the Soviet influence. So I really, on those 2 bullets, I hope you understand what's going on there. The Soviet troops, and I kind of talked about how the Eastern Front, the one with the Soviet Union, how that front was just so much more bloody and it had so much more warfare, and there was so much more life lost on that side than there was on the Western Front. I mean, both were psychotically, and the whole war in general, it was psychotically bloody. Again, I hope some of you guys kind of got to see that that awesome 18-minute video on the wars, and it kind of gives us hope for now because they talk about how right now we're in such a large time of peace. I know you think there's a lot of wars, but actually a lot less people are dying than there have been in the past, thank God. But anyways, that's kind of those 2 points right there. And the last point, which is interesting since San Francisco, is there's the United Nations. Now, if you're still with me on my website, if you go on the very, very bottom, just want to kind of give you that kind of picture of what Germany looked like. And obviously this is a really crappy picture. I need to get a better one. But there's the British, there's the French, there's the American on the left-hand side primarily. And then on the far right-hand side in red, you're going to see the Soviet Union. And notice that Berlin is in the middle with a little circle around it. And Berlin, if you can imagine that, was cut into 4 pieces as well, representing the same thing. And what you'll see is East Germany and West Germany. And West Germany, those 3 non-red states will unify, have a election, have a president, and basically have great relationships with Great Britain and the United States, while East Germany, will have an election which will only have a communist president, who basically is a puppet, government of the Soviet Union, and will be always listening to the Soviet Union. And that's where earlier I talked about, just a little bit later, you're going to hear about something called the Berlin Airlift. And if you look at where the British flag is and where that little lake, it looks like a lake, but that's actually city Berlin. Well, we couldn't drive our tanks and supplies over there because we'd be going to the Soviet ones and they'd probably cause a war, and then we'd have a massive war with nuclear weapons and bad things. So we have something called the Berlin Airlift, where basically we just drop off supplies to the Western Berliners, the ones that have democracy, and drop those things off. And in between those two areas is something called the Berlin Wall. And how did people get in and out of that? And they used the airport to get in and out. So that's how they got from West Berlin to West Germany safely. All right, I'll go back to the little document. 756, I'm almost done with this. What are important battles? I don't think any of them battles are important. The only two things that they say is D-Day and island hopping. What would I know? Europe was by land, where Russia lost a lot of the people. America, once again, doesn't come in at the very beginning of the war, but practically middle through it. Yes, we lose a lot of people, but if it wasn't for our help in Europe, they probably lost to Nazi Germany. The other side, I don't know. Island hopping. Some famous ones that pop up in my head are Battle of Midway, Guadalcanal, and probably Iwo Jima and Okinawa. All right. Yeah, Iwo Jima and I think it's Okinawa. Lend-Lease Act is where we went against cash and carry, and we said, you know what? We will let Britain buy as many things that they need from the United States on credit. Can you explain the Nye Committee? If somebody give me a page number on the Nye Committee, I can help you. I think we'll end on that tonight. I don't know, Baha. I need to figure out the page number. I don't remember talking about the Nye Committee. I remember talking about the Stimson Committee or something, Stimson Committee, or Stimson Doctrine or something. Um, 525. What is it called? The Nye Committee? Nye. Let's number one. That's funny. Basically, a Nye Committee is a senator, and they go to research what was the reason we started World War I, and they're like, oh, it's because of J.P. Morgan Chase loaning $3 billion over to Great Britain. And because we loaned it to Great Britain, we won Great Britain to win. It was really J.P. Morgan Chase telling Woodrow Wilson to fight the war. It really wasn't us fighting for democracy. And also for arms manufacturers, because those guys wanted us to build more bombs so they could make more money. After this, in the beginning of the Cold War, we're going to go. Eisenhower was the general during World War II, and he's going to say this: you need to be wary. His farewell address, like George Washington, has some interesting ramifications later. And he says this: you better be scared of something called the military-industrial complex. And let's think about those three words: military, guns, bombs, and anything else; industrial, the making of; complex, working government and economics. He says, this is a little crazy. They have a lot of control in our government. And what you're seeing right here in World War I is some people saying, you know what? The only reason why we're doing this is to make sure that bomb makers, tank makers, bullet makers, uniform makers, so that they have a job and they get more and more money. And that's what they say is happening in World War I. So why fight World War II? All you're doing is helping greedy bankers and greedy manufacturers who make bombs and guns and bullets. All right, guys. 8 o'clock. I'm out. So hopefully that was helpful. All 30 of you were actually here, and actually all 30 of you here for a pretty good amount of time. That's pretty successful. So hopefully you guys got what you needed. Good luck tomorrow. Have a good sleep. Probably won't be going to sleep, but good luck with that. Yeah. Bye. Later. Yeah, no worries. Anytime. Yep, yep, yep.